Hi, I decided to make this video. It's the first time I've ever done this, so please bear with me. The subject of this video that I decided to make was involving the viruses and the reproduction of viruses and viruses that are around every day, and in particular the coronavirus that's become a big problem in the last few months, I guess. Um, the reason I decided to do this is because I used to work in a research lab where I worked with mutating certain proteins that are involved in diabetes, and I also worked on ATPase, which is the powerhouse of the cell, and I lastly worked with a neurotrophin called NGF that was used to maintain the health of a neuron that had to do with Alzheimer's disease. So we used cell lines and we used different viruses to make the proteins that we used to study for these different diseases. And I actually became a pretty good at making viruses. And, I'm just going to put this out there and see what other people and researchers think about actual production and making of viruses that we know about. Viruses like to be in an environment that's telling them that the cells are living in a happy, healthy sort of environment. They like to be where there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of sugar that gets into the cells, so that they know that the cells are in an environment where they could actually get into the cell and make more particles so that they have a production line. So they use the cell, the healthy cell, the host cell, to produce more of itself. And that's how, the cell operates. It gets taken over by the virus, who then uses it to replicate itself. So it wants an environment that's very saturated with nutrients, that it will fake the host cell into thinking that it's part of itself. So basically, when we do that, we put the cells in an environment and we test that environment to see what environment works best in making high yield production of that virus. So we sometimes alter certain hormones, trophins, different things that we put into the media of the cells that we're using as hosts. And we titrate a particular, let's say, insulin to see, how much insulin works best to get the highest yield for a virus. Okay, well, it turns out, and there's a lot of evidence, that insulin does play, along with other trophins that are in the body. I mean, you just got to view yourself as sort of like a petri dish and try and view it as though to apply to what's going on in the outside world today. So if the virus wants to make a lot, it basically wants to have certain triggers there on the cell that will allow it to say, this is good, let's enter here, this cell is eating, it's ready to go, it's making ATP, it's, and we'll just fool it and let it think that it's part of us and, sort of take it over. So it turns out that diabetics really are more susceptible to infections from viruses. And that's probably because they can't maintain a constant, or they have trouble with their glucose levels in their bloodstream. So one moment it's real high, and they don't know how to come down off that high. So it always stays high, the sugar level. So, that's like telling the virus that this is a very plush and enriched environment, and maybe this will be a good place, kind of thing. And it sort of ends up taking over. It makes the person very, very sick on top of already having the diabetes. So it turns out that, in particular, this coronavirus started in China, We're not really sure how that all started and everything, but the one thing that I can say is that China is like the diabetic capital in the world. It turns out that when you're a diabetic, you really should stay away from starchy kind of foods like rice and bread and pasta, and eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, which they do, but their main staple is really rice. And it's very, when the body metabolizes that, that's very fast energy. And so, with the virus being in that country over there, and everybody's eating a couple of bowls of rice a day, there's spikes in their glucose levels and their sugar like immediately. So, if you bump into somebody, so I mean, that virus jumps off one person, someone sneezes on you, the next thing you know, it's on that person that just ate, 2 bowls of rice, and they got some like fast sugar in their blood. And the virus is saying, let me get over there. So basically, if rice wasn't maybe as huge of a commodity over there to eat, and they did have more opportunity to eat different sort of mixtures of food that weren't so high in the breakdown into glucose, carbohydrates, and then glucose, the severity of the disease might not be as bad. So, I mean, a person might have not eaten rice, had, you know, something else that's a little bit more healthier, just had some fruit and, a piece of cheese, let's say, for breakfast, and then they wouldn't have the spike maybe in their routine day in the glucose. And so, yeah, they might have been exposed to the virus, but if they had that kind of eating pattern all the time, they may have had a less severe case and just had a really, really bad, bout. But it wouldn't have been so life threatening, and they wouldn't have gotten infected as badly. I know that in the lab, there are titration curves that we do, to determine what is the optimal. It's usually at a higher end with insulin and different neurotrophins and different trophins that are found in the media that we use. So I'm not sure exactly how much insulin level would be needed to keep it more of a mild infection, but there is and can be an eating pattern to elevate and lower the glucose in the blood so that it fools the virus into thinking, well, this environment is not as good as the last one we were at, so we're not going to make as much over here. And, the person did get a little bit sick or whatever, but it was more of a routine sickness. It wouldn't have been so severe. That's probably one of the reasons that diabetics have issue, because if they can't get a hold of the insulin that they need, or they can't get the shot for the insulin, their sugar level still stays elevated, and so the virus can really, go crazy inside their systems, because sugar's everywhere, and hopefully, the cells get in there and eat. But usually, they end up with a side effect from the diabetes and with the virus infection, as opposed to actually having a very severe bout of something with being diabetic.